The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. Dick Cavett's long show business career was undoubtedly launched in his childhood when his mother would stand him on a chair to recite for family and friends in their Nebraska home. As a teenager, he honed his act in public as a magician, in private practicing Bob Hope jokes in front of a mirror. Since then, he's worked as a stage actor, stand-up comedian, and written 2 autobiographies. But he's best known as a witty and literate interviewer, going one-on-one with some of the world's most interesting and accomplished people. The newest home for his distinctive brand of thoughtful conversation is The Dick Cavett Show on CNBC. And welcome to Upon Reflection.
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask me to do 2 things. Recite some of the things I did as a revolting infant standing on a chair. Or to remember my Bob Hope jokes, or I should, of course, say his Bob Hope jokes.
Neither.
Because we shouldn't tell people this, but before we went on the air, we were discussing one of the most, to me, fascinating professional secrets, I think we could say, of this business is, which is, you who did the show are not the best authority on what was said on it, sometimes as little as 2 hours later.
It's very much like a comment you made once about fame, that you can never appreciate the fame that you had because you can't experience it like other people do who watch you.
Right, and your name, I mean, it's hard to say Cary Grant without thinking a famous actor, but there was a time when those syllables meant no more than normal Google. And as your name, which means eventually becomes well known to people, suddenly those 4 syllables have an impact every time they're said, and you're around, and yet you feel like the same person you were back in Oregon or Nebraska. And it's just, I don't know if anybody ever fully adjusts to it.
Was there ever any doubt that you were going to be a performer?
Well, I have no conscious memory of this nauseating sounding scene in which I was propped up and recited things from Midsummer Night's Dream, apparently, at an age. W.C. Fields would love to have come in and taken half my head off with a niblick if he could have seen this. I suppose you wouldn't even have to be a Freudian to say whatever approval I got from my mother and the adoring members of the Bridge Club or whatever saw these performances must have been important, making me seek out the spotlight. Or how old do you have to be before you still say the limelight? They haven't used lime and lights and...
But I don't remember you having aspirations of, say, wanting to be a brain surgeon or a veterinarian. It's always been show business.
There was, in some sense, never any question or never any answer. I guess it was just, if I tend to think of my life as something I've let drift, but I at least knew that was the direction I would let it drift in, not toward the law or any other...
Politics, heaven forbid.
Dubious profession.
When
I
you
wouldn't want to have spent my life helping people who blew their parents away escape the consequences of it, just to make up an example from nowhere.
From nowhere.
Yeah.
When you would think about show business, when you were old enough to really have aspirations of joining this world that you were looking at from Nebraska, in your mind, what was it like? What would it be like for you?
That's a question I wish I'd thought of, or maybe I did. I haven't read my books lately. I guess I'd sort of pictured a world of skyscrapers and limousines and stage doors, I suppose, in some vague way, and my being among them, and what I thought I was going to get out of that, or what good it was going to do me, or what it contributed to our society, were the farthest things from my mind. It was just some sort of vague notion, almost like those you'd see in the previews of an upcoming MGM movie of showbiz and glistening floors and bright lights and men in tuxedos
Women in
and
satin gowns,
ladies in gowns,
cigarette holders.
I guess where on earth what I thought I wanted with that, I don't know, but I still hope to find it someday.
The term show
That's
business...
why I'm here, hoping it might be here. I've looked everywhere else.
Who knows? The term show business is kind of an old-fashioned term. I suppose now it'd be called the entertainment industry, something
Yes.
that has a more hygienic sound to
I
it.
guess so. Is that one of the new euphemisms? Show business too vulgar?
Well,
The way deaf is too vulgar, you have to be hearing impaired now?
the words show business, I mean, you think of people like Fred Allen or Groucho Marx, and they seem larger than life. And I wonder if is it passing time, or were they really bigger? Were they bigger stars?
I wonder, that because when people say they don't make them like that anymore, you have two instincts. One is to say, oh, nonsense, every decade has its own great people. And yet there does to be something more giant about the film stars, certainly, of that time. Maybe we're so damn close to them now through the vulgarities of television confession shows and things. And so I can remember in my lifetime, and not that long ago, somebody saying they were going to watch the Jack Parr show that night because I think the first big movie star, I don't remember who it was going to come on and just talk.
Amazing.
And as my secretary said, and the idea that I was going to see a movie star sit down off the screen and talk. In those days, the Parr guests were unknown people, largely a little circle of friends. And someone like Edward G. Robinson or someone was going to come on and just speak. You couldn't conceive of it. So since you couldn't conceive of it, maybe that's partly why we thought of them as bigger. Then the fact is they were bigger and better.
Groucho and Fred Allen.
In some way they were. Well, at least let's keep up the dream that they were.
Now, when you started out as a comedy writer, I mean, looking at it from the outside, it seems like you started at the top. I mean, pretty rarefied atmosphere working with Jack Parr.
I guess that's right. I didn't really serve any apprenticeship. I just took some jokes to my hero at the time who hired me.
Jack Parr.
Jack Parr, yeah. And
it was kind of like All About Eve, wasn't it?
That was, in a way it was, although I wasn't trying to bounce someone else out, as in the movie All About Eve, I don't think. Well, let's see. No, not at all. I just thought, I want to step into that world. And I don't remember thinking this is a dumb or smart way to do it. Something just said, I guess it sounds like the kind of thing you'd spend fortune now in assertive therapy learning to do. You want something, you go right for it. A dreadful piece of advice in most cases.
But it worked for you.
In that case, it was as if the timing had been, as if I'd seen the movie and then reenacted the scene. You go up to this floor, and at that moment, the person you're looking for will be coming around the corner from the men's room, presumably.
Well, that's where Jack Parr said you accosted him was in the men's room.
Well, Jack's instinct for a better story has made him change it to inside the men's room, but it was months before I ever got to actually see the inside of the men's room at NBC. And it's not as exciting as you'd think.
You had it must have been kind of an out-of-body experience. I mean, here you press this set of jokes on your idol, and lo and behold, you watch, and he uses some of them.
Yeah, I was sort of invited into the country club party that I'd been looking at through the window or something. It was definitely a feeling of, I have stepped through the looking glass. I'm now inside the world I tried to imagine myself in. And talking about it too much, of course, encourages other people to do it, and they could run afoul of circumstances. Also, in a funny way, that was such an innocent age that a person could walk into, let's say, in this case, NBC, up to the 6th floor and go right up to a major personage, and could have to the President of the United States if he'd been standing there, too. Now you can barely get into a building in Manhattan.
Very different time.
And the saga of what's happened to the world since those days. When I was a copy boy at the time, I used to marvel that anybody who wanted to on the street could walk in, take the elevator at night to the 25th floor, go into Henry Grunwald's office, open his desk drawers, read what the cover was going to be about, and look at the copy that hadn't been edited yet. And nowadays, if you can get into the building, past the radar scopes and so forth. Yeah.
You worked for a time behind the scenes, writing comedy, and it's actually gotten to be kind of a popular subject. There are movies being made about it, and it looked like a lot of fun. But at some point, you decided you would go from behind the scenes into the spotlight yourself. What made you go into stand-up comedy yourself?
I'm not completely sure, except that I still remembered what it felt like to be a magician, that is, a performer, back when I was a kid in Nebraska and got to the point where I was making money at it. In high school, I did shows for the Elks Club and that sort of thing, church basements. Met Carson in a church basement where he was doing the same thing, although he was a big star. In Omaha, he probably got $100 where I got 25 or 10 or something. I did remember that, and I don't remember ever consciously, though, thinking there's a big star out there getting laughs that he wouldn't be getting if I hadn't written those words, though that strikes you in another way. Isn't it funny? If I were back, say, in Nebraska watching him, I would never stop to think who wrote those words for him. Here it is. I did. But somehow that approval, maybe going back to standing on that chair reciting poetry as a kid, was always there and made me get back out in the light.
One of the people who encouraged you to take that step was Woody Allen, who you've described as someone who served as a mentor to you from time to time.
He did, and it was convenient timing in another way there because he was making an excruciating transition for him from behind the typewriter. He really hadn't performed, though he did close-up magic as a kid. Had that in common. And and so I could kind of watch him go through the agony of putting an act together, taking it down to a club, waiting hours to go on, maybe getting some laughs, killing time in the Village.
It's a tough life.
You have to go through the same damn thing again.
Did you write for him? Because it wasn't until I read your book, I always thought that the joke about the Chinese-German restaurant was Woody Allen's.
No, the way you might have confused that is that I sat for hours, came up with that, called Woody, he said, "Great joke, Cavett." That's how Woody breaks. That's how he breaks up, and I have reported that a couple times. So maybe you connected. I mean, I've mentioned that on
you have to
interviews.
tell the joke.
Since Woody thought it was a good joke, I knew it was going to work that night. It doesn't seem so odd now, but I remember thinking, I need a laugh right here. Could any viewer wonder what we're talking about? A restaurant with some build-up where they sold Chinese, or the chef was a combination of Chinese and German. God, how did the punchline go? Because if I lose one syllable, I blow it. Oh, Chinese-German food is good. The only problem is an hour later, you're hungry for power.
Right.
That was what it was, yeah.
The other joke that...
It was a kind of
these
a
are all
get the
from this
Germans
list
joke.
you drew up when you were at CBS doing this show, this replacement show for Carol Burnett, and you wrote a list of jokes. It's where I ran across it. The other one being, I was at a wedding where the bride was pregnant and they threw puffed rice.
My God, I'd forgotten that one for a while, yes.
That was a moment in your career. I mean, you always think of people having some kind of control over their lives, but that summer replacement show, short-lived, that you did for Carol Burnett seemed to be sort of the biggest disastrous moment of your career.
I've almost repressed it, and the thing is, I didn't know enough at the time to know how misguided the whole enterprise was.
And you were very miscast.
I really needed somebody to throw me a lifeline, say, grab this and pull yourself ashore.
What do you do
There
when
were
you're
four of
asked
them,
to
and
do
actually-
things that don't fit you? I mean, they want you to come out.
I don't know what the theory of all that was. That was a chance to replace Carol for 4 weeks and try a variety format. Not a thing I would necessarily be bad in, but as that one was conceived, it was virtually guaranteed to send viewers to hope for the invention of cable at that time.
As I was reading the description of that, I wondered, what would it be like? You knew it was a disaster. What would it be like to be getting ready the day of this taping when you know it's just going to be a bomb?
I had no reason to think it was. I was innocently thinking, oh, it's nice to go over to CBS and nice studio and all, and never dreaming that I was going to step into a nightmare of taping that was supposed to end at 5 and was still going at midnight with people walking around with battle fatigue, what some great war writer called the 1,000-mile stare that young men have when they first come out of combat. 20 years older and staring 1,000 miles into the distance. That's how everything looked. Somehow they managed to get something almost arable out of it. And of course, as with everything you do, there's one clipping somewhere saying the best thing Cavett's ever done, he deserves a network slot on the basis of the first show alone. However, it's unbalanced by those more accurately viewing it, I think. If you put on a balance scale. And it was a case of a total mismatch of producers and me.
And sort of everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
Mismatch of producers, mismatch of me. Let me work on the grammar of that and send it back.
Okay. You, as we talked about, you grew up, you did magic tricks, performing, kind of always a ham. But you end up making your biggest mark in show business as an interviewer.
Biggest smirk?
Smark.
Oh, biggest mark. Oh, I thought you said a bigger smirk. Now, don't feel condemned by that. One ear has still not opened from the flight in yesterday where they said buckle your seatbelts and your neighbors around you if possible.
I'll
but
try to speak
I'm now
more
back
clearly.
Now. I'll just try to get all. I won't be distracting a lot. I keep doing that. Over there, it popped a little. There, thank you, Jacques Cousteau.
We all feel better. Back to interviewing
Back to the
and how
smirk
it
or
happened.
mark, depending on whichever you want me to. Biggest mark what?
As an interviewer. I mean, you didn't grow up in Nebraska.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I want to be an
Boy, I want
interviewer
to be
when
an
I grow up.
Imagine someone weird enough to go around as a kid playing interviewer. Well, actually, it turns out Larry King and some others did. The romantic idea of a guy sitting leaning over a microphone. And we all saw photos of, at my age, of Mel Allen and famous sportscasters, and some of us played that. I wasn't one. No, that was pure accident. My greatest goal was to get, maybe, to be a guest on talk shows sometimes.
To be in the spotlight.
And be seen by
So here you are, spending
people.
many, many years of your life sitting to the side.
Well, it was a little like getting onto the Parr show as a staff member and thinking, wait a minute, I realize now what I really wanted was to be on the Parr show, not to be a staff member putting other people on it. And I didn't want to be a talk show host, I sometimes think. I wanted to be a guest. That's why it's much more fun for me to be a guest.
So how did you end up being a
Not my
host?
responsibility. If you get some dumb guest on who thinks you said smirk and you said mark, it's not your problem when you're the guest. Wait a minute. You understand what I'm trying to say?
But I know you're going to answer my question one of these days.
Okay, go ahead. Try me as you would a politician who would say, let me say this, and then says something completely else.
No, that would be too hard. But I will ask you, how did it happen? It's a role you never sought out,
in
and
fact,
yet it's what
how
you've
it happened?
done.
Well, it just happened because somebody at ABC, I know, as a guest on The Tonight Show, I sat in for Carson sometimes when the show was back in New York. ABC had seen that and said, we ought to try a daytime talk show, or that guy who sits in for Carson and appears on it sometimes. What would be my guess? I've never actually quizzed anybody. But.
It's amazing. You have these moments where whole new careers open up through fortuitous single circumstances. Seems to be a lot of fate involved.
Yeah, I wonder if it is, and I wonder if I rely on that, and because then there are whole periods where I haven't the slightest interest in my career, alleged career, and think, well, I did everything I wanted to do, and people say, why aren't you doing more? And I think, well, yeah, I wish I were doing more, but no, I don't. So, in other words, there's never been a real hard plan, though that's another way of doing it, and sometimes people with real hard plans do well, too. What am I talking
Were you
about?
ambivalent when this latest show on CNBC was proposed? I mean, did you feel like, can I ask any more questions? Are there any more people I really want to sit and talk with?
A little bit, in that, also at the time their goal was to be more consumer-oriented and business-oriented, and I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing in that mix?
Seems an odd match.
But it rather quickly and inevitably became a case where you could have a greater variety of guests on. And I still get a huge kick out of being able to sit and talk with somebody who's appealing to me in some way, and I can surprise them either by making them feel comfortable or uncomfortable, or myself so, and the kind of give and take danger that takes place in a conversation that's not planned out. I still get a kick out of that, and at its best you wonder why would anybody do anything else, and at its worst, how did I get into this?
Get me off this horse.
Voluntarily, like in a nightclub floor where you're bombing, and think, I walked out into the brightest spot in this room, and I'm humiliating myself. What would I do that for?
What do people dislike most about your work?
Oh, you'll have to ask them. They're lined up outside now behind ropes.
Finally our chance.
Mr. Cavett, it's all here. They were handing me notes, things never to do again. I don't know. I've never thought of that or seen it or heard it put quite that way. And if you had, you probably wouldn't have put it that way either. Sometimes people say you talk and we want the guest to, though at the same time I'm praised for the exact opposite. So I don't know.
You
and
use that as a
I've found,
technique to get them going.
Exactly. And if the guest isn't talking, you feel it's my party, I got to fill it up here. And also that's also a technique of making them sometimes think, hey, this guy's taking all the time, and somebody who wasn't going to speak then will. So I don't know. Maybe that. And then there are people who say you're not supposed to have an opinion. Not sure where it says that. I mean, I only found this year that there's no right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty in this country, despite the myth that we heard all through Tanya. Remember, the cornerstone of our democracy, every time a mic was pushed, people are innocent until proven guilty. Well, somebody from Columbia Law School finally got tired of hearing that and wrote, there's no such right in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or anywhere else. There's a rule of evidence. That's a rather complicated thing. And judges, if the jail's full of people they decide are dangerous before trial, and they presume them guilty, not innocent. Isn't it nice to learn a little thing like that?
It is.
Then you think,
I feel
can't wait to get on a talk
already.
show and talk about that with somebody. Now I did. Now I'm happy. I go home back to bed.
I was interested in what you thought about people who dislike you. I mean, we know you have many
Oh.
fans. I was in Paul Duke's office once years ago, and his walls were plastered with hate mail. And I read that when you were doing comedy, you
Paul
liked the
Duke.
hecklers. You liked the hecklers.
I like the hecklers, yeah, not because of their dislike of me, because of the fun it was to
play with them.
joust with them, or juiced. I loved that part. And I was often funnier. Usually I'm with something unexpected than something prepared. But you little sawed-off communist faggot shrimp kind of letters that usually used to come from Waco, Texas, invariably, for whatever reason, before it was quite as famous as it is today, always amused me somewhat. That's a specific one I remember, and the fact that it was from the governor was
In the last few years, we've found out that the Dick Cavett that we saw was, it's not surprising, it was an image that you had, you were a performer, but that you had, for a great part of your life, suffered from very serious depression. And it was about 14 years ago you had the episode that you called the big one.
Yeah, well, wasn't it actually a great part? When you have it, it seems like a great part of your life. Although I guess I can remember what were probably mini episodes. It seemed to come almost yearly, where I'd think, oh, I'm in my dull phase now. I wish I weren't, because I've got a guest on I really like. And I wish I were in my crackling phase, which I was in. But I never had the dubious honor of manic depression. Manic depression is
Much more exciting.
when cured, in fact, missed the manic phases. But I've had a couple of really bad episodes, and the having gone public about it and talking about how you can be treated which is unfortunately still news to people. You know, you're feeling somewhere there's someone who hasn't heard that Pearl Harbor was bombed in '41 quite yet. Has been a mixed blessing, because it's nice when people on the street say, you saved my mother's life, or my sister's, or mine, because for some reason, just hearing you talk about it, for whatever reason, jogged me to do something I hadn't when I'd heard
It's a great
similar
comfort for people.
I guess in that sort of dumb way that a celebrity saying something says to some people, well, I've known that person over the years, and if it can happen to him, particularly someone who maybe seemed unlikely to have it, then it isn't so bad it could happen to me.
So what's the bad part?
That's...
You said there was a kind of a good part to talking about depression then.
Oh, well, then the bad part is you tend to get a little overwhelmed with people who need to know your medication if you're taking one, your doctor immediately, oh, please, I've got to know, I've got my heart set on it, that kind of thing. You obviously can't do that, and at least people are learning that almost every state has some place you can call, or I needed physical contact there at the moment, or Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York refers all over the country. So there are hotlines, but 8 years ago, most undiscussed subject in the world, unknown.
Did coming to grips with it change you as a performer at all? I mean, you joked about being kind of duller. Did it take an edge that you had before? An edge that it took to fight through the Depression and be the Dick Cavett that we saw?
I really don't know. I would probably have to have somebody watching me say that, or tell me that. But I'm not aware of that particularly. What is quite amazing, and that people who haven't had a serious clinical depression, who are in civilian jobs, you can somehow do your performing work to a degree that you think looks awful, and it doesn't look that bad. Some automatic pilot almost takes over for you. And that, in some ways, it's... well, I suppose that accounts for the number of people who say, gee, the night before she shot herself in her hotel room, she was stopping the show,
She
singing
seemed so happy,
bouncing all over the stage. You know. Well, partly she was escaping into the stage, and when she went off of it, the shadows closed around her again. Here we sit here speaking right after a suicide in the immediate area.
We have just a minute left. It's not enough time. But you described what drives you once as kind of this pathological desire for what you call the mysterious satisfaction. You wrote that
Did I?
over 10 years ago.
I got to jot that down and write it again.
Have you found it yet?
No way. No, I don't know if it's you ever. Or maybe, if not having found it, at least maybe I've thought, well, I've done the things I wanted to do, and they've been fine, and I still like doing them a lot. But in middle age, which I'm approaching any day now, from one direction or another, you start to think, what are the important things? My goodness. Right at the end of the show, I start to get profound. But there were two bald men who put their heads together and made an ass of themselves.
And on that note,
see, I didn't want to end the show on a downer. Remember, I was a comedian.
And you feel responsible.
I felt responsible.
And you've carried out that responsibility.
For making one member of the crew put his hand over his mouth and leave the room for whatever reason.
Dick Cavett, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on Upon Reflection.
Thank you. Marcia, is it?
It is. Seattle, too, right?
I threw a host like that one time by pretending not to know the name. And the poor guy's face fell, so we could hardly get through the rest of the show. And I knew the name. It's wicked of me.
It is.
But I could tell you're invulnerable.
You have to go to your corner now.
Shall I shut up?
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.